I'll start recording, and I want to share my screen so that together we can chant the prayers that we always chant together. So Om Jnanam Timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Rati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavansha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitam He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripasindhu Vyayevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasani Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So please repeat after me. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate
Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
So one last thing I forgot to mention, your registration forms are due before class next week, so please send them in by Friday. Just the registration form. You can take more time on the recommendation letter if you need to, but for those of you who are taking the exam, please send in the registration form before next week. Starting next week, I'll start taking roll call. So those of you who have sent in your registration, I'll just be noting your attendance for that. So the homework and things, like I mentioned, you can do, but just your registration so that we can get you registered. Okay, now I'll share my slides for chapter 4. Here we go. So chapter 4, this chapter is, it has some of the most commonly quoted verses in the Bhagavad Gita. Again, it's so marvelous how every chapter of the Gita appears to be the most special chapter. And when you read chapter 4, you'll be like, oh, really? It's in this chapter? I remember this verse. This is like such an important point. This is one of the key ideas of Krishna consciousness. It's in this chapter. So that is, chapter 4 is like that. So many essential, important themes Krishna speaks in chapter 4. And while the first chapter was setting the scene, in the second chapter, Krishna discussed the knowledge of the soul, Buddhi Yoga, the knowledge of the self. And in chapter 3, Krishna talked about Karma Yoga. What is the correct way, or what is the art of action? And now in chapter 4, Krishna is talking about how you gain the knowledge so that you know how to act. Chapter 4 is called Transcendental Knowledge, Jnana Yoga. So the continuation from chapter 3 is that Krishna is saying, act, do your duty, perform your prescribed duty without fruitive desire, as a service to God, selflessly. But then the natural question that comes up is, well, how do I know how to act? Where does that knowledge come from? What is that knowledge? So in chapter 4, Krishna is speaking about transcendental knowledge. Transcendental knowledge about Krishna through the parampara system is discussed in the first 8 verses. Krishna starts out by pointing out that any knowledge that is bona fide or genuine should come from God. Any knowledge that is perfect needs to come from God. Otherwise, it will have the 4 defects. Every human being has 4 defects. Our senses are illusion. We have the cheating tendency. They are imperfect. And I forget the 4th one. It's slipping my mind. Huh?
Cheating?
I mentioned that. Cheating, illusion, imperfect. And there's a 4th one. Huh?
Illusion.
Illusion, I got that one.
Commit mistakes, Prabhu.
Commit mistakes, yes. And the 4th is that we commit mistakes. So all knowledge is imperfect. That comes from a human being. No matter how wonderful, how marvelous that person must be. Only knowledge that comes from the Supreme Lord is perfect. Only that knowledge is ideal, it is perfect. And therefore, even though Krishna himself is God and he's perfect, he's starting by first establishing to Arjuna that this knowledge that I'm telling you did not start here, but this knowledge is in fact eternal. And this is why you see in this world, even the greatest philosophers, there's always someone who finds a flaw in their writings. There's always something imperfect, something incomplete in what they say. But Krishna's writings, Krishna's Bhagavad Gita, that has stood the test of time. And the older it gets, the more people marvel in its beauty. The more it's so wonderful, the more it's so enlivening to the self. So that is the nature of transcendental knowledge. That's why this is proof that this is Krishna's words, because they never get old and people find more and more deeper meanings in it every single day. So Krishna starts out by telling Arjuna, I first imparted this knowledge to Vivasvan, the sun god. This knowledge was first given to the very sun. How fantastic, right? The sun that we see every morning. This is literal. We have to think about it in this way, that every morning we look at this beautiful sun. Krishna gave the knowledge of the Gita to the sun. The sun god Vivasvan instructed it to Manu, the father of mankind. And Manu instructed it to Ikshvaku. So, like in certain traditions, they have Adam and Eve. In the Sanskrit literatures, in the Vedic literatures, the first man is Manu. Manu means man. So Krishna instructed it to Manu. Manu instructed it to his son, who was the next king, Ikshvaku. And like this, it was passed down from one king to another, from one king to another. Why the kings? Krishna explained this in the last chapter. Why did Krishna tell it to the kings? Was he biased? Was he, was he after power? And why was he telling this knowledge to the kings? Someone would like to answer? The answer was in the last chapter.
Because they are the
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, can you please repeat the question?
The question is, why did Krishna impart this knowledge to the kings? Why didn't he impart it to the to the cooks or the priests or the warriors? Why the kings?
Because they are role models for the society.
Examples for the ignorant persons.
Yes.
Because they hold power and people will listen to them.
Yes.
They are
Yes.
the leaders of the society.
Yes. Very nice. So Krishna said in the third chapter, right? Yad yada charati sheshtas tattadevi. That whatever action a great man performs, common men follow. And whatever example he sets, all the world pursues. This is the exact translation. Whatever action a great man performs, common men follow. Whatever example he sets, all the world pursues. And therefore, it's a fact that the worst thing that a leader can do to society, the worst thing a president can do to his citizens, is to set a bad example. If the leader is morally corrupt, if the leader lowers the moral standard of society, then for generations to come, that society will suffer and the civilization will fall to that lower moral standard. If the leader shows, oh, it's not important to be, to be to be chaste in our relationships. We can be adulterous, and we can be. It's not important to use, proper language when referring to respectable people. If it's not important to treat people equally, then people will follow. And we see that in society. This is exactly what happens. Why? Because it's the nature of human nature to follow our leaders. And therefore, Krishna speaks the knowledge, and he wants to educate and uplift, first and foremost, the leaders of society. Because he knows that if he gives the knowledge to the kings, like Arjuna, to the leaders of civilization, then he automatically gives it to everyone. Of course, Krishna doesn't have to do it that way, but he's setting an example. And therefore, Prabhupada actually requested his disciples, and I heard this directly from in a class that Shama Sundar Prabhu gave, the same disciple of Srila Prabhupada, Sham Sundar Prabhu, who preached to George Harrison. George Harrison, who was the most famous singer of that time, one of the Beatles. Prabhupada told him that preach to the leaders of society. Try to preach to those who are influential, who are leaders. Because if you do that, then you'll affect the lives of thousands of people. And this was a fact after Sham Sundar Prabhu preached to George Harrison. George Harrison made the record, My Sweet Lord, and many others like Here Comes the Sun. And as a result of that record, Hare Krishna became a household word in America. Literally everyone in America heard the Hare Krishna Mahamantra because they heard his record. It was playing on the radio, every radio station all over America and Europe, all over the world. And in that record was the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. And so many devotees in our movement came to Krishna consciousness after hearing that record. They say, I first heard Hare Krishna there. I became attracted to the Hare Krishna mantra. I started looking for it, and that's what brought me to Krishna consciousness. George Harrison wanted to take initiation from Srila Prabhupada and become like a full devotee, look like a devotee and everything. And he came to Srila Prabhupada, and Prabhupada said, you are already my disciple. You are Hari's son, Harrison, Hari's son. And therefore, you keep doing what you are doing, because if you change your, if you no longer keep your quote unquote external appearance the same, then your preaching will be affected. And so he was one person that Prabhupada actually allowed to keep long hair and kind of keep the beard and stay in that way, because he actually was, one of the most famous people in the world. We cannot imitate that example because we're not one of the most famous people in the world. But the point being that Srila Prabhupada, Lord Chaitanya, and others, they spread this knowledge to everyone, every single soul, low, high, man, woman, black, white, everyone. At the same time, they recognized that this knowledge must be shared most urgently with the leaders of society, because the leaders have so much influence on the population. So Krishna here describes a succession of kings. He starts the 4th chapter by describing a succession of kings who received this knowledge, because he spoke the knowledge to all the leaders of the world. And then he speaks this knowledge, but then what happens over time? He gives this knowledge to the leaders, and then what happens to the knowledge over time?
Succession breaks.
Yes, the knowledge gets lost. Someone in the succession becomes the weakest link and forgets to give it, pass it on, or passes it on but not in the pure form. And in this way, the knowledge over time becomes lost. And then once it's lost, then what does Krishna have to do? Who can say, what does Krishna have to do?
He has to come and re-establish everything.
Yes, then he comes and he appears. He then incarnates, he appears in this world to re-establish the principles of religion. And we all know this verse, that's why I didn't put it here. We've probably all heard it. These are the famous verses of the Gita that are all over India and over much of the world. They're, very, very famous verses of the Gita. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyuthanam adharmasya ratmanam shrujamyaham paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya cha dushkritam samsthapanataya sambhavami yuge yuge. Krishna says, whenever and wherever there is a decline in religious practice or descendant of Bharata and a predominant rise of irreligion, at that time I descend myself to deliver the pious and to annihilate the miscreants, as well as to re-establish the principles of religion. I myself appear millennium after millennium. So Krishna then says these famous verses that when that knowledge is lost, when the principles of religion are being destroyed, when the miscreants are becoming too powerful, then Krishna appears to re-establish and reconnect this succession. And this is what he did when he spoke the Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna. So, the first section of chapter 4 is glorifying transcendental knowledge, but more specifically, it is describing how transcendental knowledge comes and is maintained and how it is received. And actually more on the reception later, but specifically he's describing how is it maintained, how is this knowledge passed down to us. Then in the next few verses, Krishna speaks also some of the most famous verses of the Gita, where he glorifies the virtue of this transcendental knowledge. Knowledge about Krishna bestows liberation. This is chapter 4, text 9, one of the most quoted verses by Srila Prabhupada. So you see how wonderful this verse is. Srila Prabhupada quoted it thousands of times. Janma karma chame divyam evam yo veti tattvataha tyaktva deham punar janma naiti mameti sorjuna. One who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. Now, in the purport to this verse, Srila Prabhupada says that this is actually literal. He says that simply if we can understand the transcendental nature of Krishna's appearance and activities, just this knowledge alone frees us from this material world. So this knowledge, a very key point here that must be realized, is that this knowledge is not just the means to the end. This knowledge is also the end. This knowledge is also the goal. This knowledge is also the substance. It is actually realization of the Lord. Srila Prabhupada in the purport, he says, but the devotee, simply by understanding the transcendental nature of the body and activities of the Lord, attains the abode of the Lord after ending this body, and does not run the risk of returning to this material world. I'll read it again. Very key sentence. This is from the purport to text 9. But the devotee, simply by understanding the transcendental nature of the body and activities of the Lord, attains the abode of the Lord after ending this body, and does not run the risk of returning to this material world. So just by understanding this transcendental knowledge, we will attain the abode of the Lord. And therefore, Prabhupada has said that we need to absorb our mind. We have to absorb ourselves in this knowledge. This is not just reading, this is absorption. We have to absorb, we have to really get into it. And devotees who get into it, you'll see they'll read every single day. And they'll read with attention, they'll read with meaning. In the Bhagavatam, there's a similar verse that it says that one who reads with rapt attention, hears with rapt attention, that person, all that is troublesome within the heart is removed. That person's heart becomes fully purified. Now, someone may say, but I read the Gita and I understand this, so am I now confirmed? My going back to God, is it confirmed? But now we will see what Krishna defines as knowledge. Knowledge is not just intellectual knowledge. And I won't break the suspense. We'll see how Krishna actually defines knowledge in a very deep way. Knowledge is not something ordinary. So yes, there's also a question that's being asked is, yes, that how can we explain the practical meaning of the transcendental nature to non-devotees? So what is the meaning of transcendental knowledge and the transcendental nature of Krishna? So then in the next verse, not the next verse, but the next famous verse, Krishna describes that everyone is seeking this knowledge and everyone is on Krishna's path. And this is our statement of pluralism, right? People say pluralistic traditions, that meaning that acceptance of other religions, other ideas. Ye yatha mam prapadyante tam sataiva bhajamyaham mama vartamanu vartante manushya partha sarvasha. Krishna says, as all surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. Everyone follows my path in all respects, O son of Pratha. So Krishna is saying that actually in this world, even if one is an atheist and one is turning away from God, even if one is a criminal, everyone in this world is following Krishna's path in all respects. And so it's a very amazing statement, but how do we understand this statement? Is Adolf Hitler following God's path? Are the murderers and the criminals all following Krishna's path? The way we understand this principle is that the only path in this world is Krishna's path. But we may be going in the correct direction or we may be going in the opposite direction. Right? Because Krishna is the creator of this world. There's only the path that Krishna has given. But we can be going in the wrong direction, away from Krishna, or we can be going closer to Krishna. If we are performing sinful activities, then we're going farther away from Krishna. But still we are following Krishna's path. Why is that? Because all of these paths, in whichever direction that we go, will ultimately only lead to Krishna. Because the material world is designed in such a way that if we do something wrong, we will suffer the reaction, we will learn our mistake, and even if it takes millions of births and deaths, we will ultimately come back to Krishna. So therefore, the devotee accepts everyone as a servant of God. He can see the soul present in everyone, and he accepts everyone as a servant of God because they see that this person belongs to the Lord. This person is dear to the Lord. This is why Krishna is present in their heart. And they are on Krishna's path, but they've taken the very long route. They've taken the very slow route, and they're going to have a lot of thorns on their path. But still, they're Krishna's children. So Krishna then says, well, everyone is on my path, but those who make an effort, those who surrender unto me more, I reward them more. Those who seek me, I give them guidance. So, although Krishna is equal to everyone, his equality, his being equal, entails him being also reciprocating accordingly. So Krishna is equal to everyone. This doesn't mean that Krishna is not especially kind to the devotee. Because if he was not especially kind to the devotee, if he did not reward the devotee according to their level of surrender, then actually Krishna would be unequal. Just like, to give you an example, if I pay more, if I go to a jewelry shop and I pay more, then I should get a better product. The fact that I'm getting a better product does not mean that the jeweler is unequal. He's actually being equal because according to the amount that is paid, he is giving the desired result. In fact, if someone paid more but they got the same product, that would be called unequal. So you find in the scripture these two statements. One statement is that Krishna is sama sarvesha, he's equal to everyone. And the second statement that you find is that Krishna is bhakta vatsal, he's especially kind to his devotees. So someone may say that these two statements are contradictory. How can Krishna be equal to everyone yet be especially kind to his devotees? Well, he does both things perfectly, because being equal means this verse here. As all surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. Being equal means to show special favor to his devotee. So Krishna is showing also the universality, the inclusivity of this knowledge and of this path. So after making this point, then comes a theme of this chapter that we're going to spend some significant time on, and that is everyone follows Krishna's path. So what are these paths? There are different paths for different people. Soon after that, Krishna then speaks of the varnashram system that he's created and how people, according to their nature, choose a specific path that's been laid out by the Lord. And this is actually the source of varnashram. Krishna saying that it comes from Krishna. Chaturvarnyam maya shishtam gunakarma vibhagasha tasya kartaram apimam vidyakartaram avyayam. According to the three modes of material nature and the work associated with them, the four divisions of human society are created by me. And although I am the creator of this system, you should know that I am yet the non-doer, being unchangeable. So the Chaturvarnyam, the four orders and four divisions of human life. This is the famous system of Varna. Varna meaning the occupations that a person has, and ashrama meaning the stages of life that a person undergoes. This system, Krishna is saying, is natural to human society and has been established by the Lord. And it is this system that is today known as the caste system. Specifically, the first one being the Varna, the first part of this, the Varna, the four castes. These are it becomes a very infamous caste system as of today. But here in this verse, Krishna describes what is the true system. The system before it became infamous. And the two words I like to focus on here are guna and karma. Krishna points out that these four varnas are based upon one's guna, one's qualities, and one's karma, one's activities. Krishna could have easily said Janma Karma. Even actually in terms of Sanskrit, Metrically, this fits very well. You could say Chaturvanya Maya Shishtam Janma Karma Vibhagasha. So Krishna could have put the word Janma there, but he chose to put the word Guna there. Guna means qualities. A person's caste, a person's varna, a person's order in life, a person's occupation in life is determined by the qualities that they have and that they exhibit, not by their birth. If someone is like a warrior, then they will become a warrior if they have the qualities of a warrior. And secondly, it's determined by one's karma. In black and white here, Krishna is saying it. It's determined by one's karma, meaning that you might have the quality of being a warrior. But then if someone is being attacked and you hide behind the stairs and you don't use the weapons that you have to protect that person, then your karma, your activities don't match the qualities of a warrior, the duties of a warrior, and therefore you are not a warrior. So your activities should also match your qualities. Just like we saw that some months back there was a school shooting, and when the shooting happened, there's only one person in the whole school who had a gun, and that was a security guard, the policeman. And when the shooting happened, this man, he hid behind the stairs. He was so afraid of the gunman, and he had a gun. None of the teachers had a gun, none of the children had a gun, and he was so afraid, he hid behind the stairs, and he saved his life. He didn't use his gun, he didn't protect anyone, and so many of the students and other staff and teachers died. And after that, the whole society, it was a very big national news, the whole society condemned this policeman. I mean, so many people hid. You know, most of the school immediately ran in different directions and found hiding spots. So many people hid. But why did they condemn the policeman? They condemned the policeman because he was supposed to protect. Not everyone was supposed to. And this shows that this varnashram system is not artificial. It's not something artificially imposed. It's already there naturally in human society. He was in the role of protection. He was trained for it. Yet he fell below the standard and did not protect, did not perform the karma, the activity of a warrior. And even though he might have had the quality of a warrior, and this is why he became a policeman, he did not exhibit those activities and was therefore disqualified. So Krishna's, you could say, determination, his the privilege of being in a certain varna is determined by these two things. So this system of varna ashram is composed of two systems actually. The first one, varna, refers to a person's occupation. Are you a carpenter? Are you a business person, a farmer, a warrior, or a teacher? The second one refers to the ashram, refers to a person's stage in life. One's material, so stage in life, we'll get to that. One's material dharmas are determined by one's varna and ashrama. And one's eternal dharma, which is beyond varnashram, is called sanatana dharma. So a very important point here, why is varnashram important? Why was it talked about so much? Is because one's dharma, one's duty, in terms of one's material duty in this world, is determined by who we are. And therefore it's determined by our varna and ashram. So in order to determine our dharma, a person has to determine their varna and their ashram. And because we're so concerned about dharma, what is duty, therefore the scriptures were concerned about varna and ashram. Just like I gave you the example of the policeman, right? The policeman's dharma, duty, was determined by his varna. And he was condemned specifically because he was not following his varna. And that's why varna is so important. For others, that dharma was not there. It said that the brahmana, if there's some attack, is allowed to hide under his bed. So the other teachers, I mean, they should have also been very valiant. But if they hid under their desks, it was understandable because it wasn't their dharma. It wasn't their varna. And so therefore it wasn't their dharma to do so. So I'm going to get into this more. There's 4 ashramas. These are the 4 ashramas. The first 25 years is the brahmachari stage of life. This is the student stage of life. This is a life of complete focus on transcendental knowledge, spiritual knowledge. Krishna in this chapter talks about the sacrifice of a brahmachari, and that sacrifice is sacrificing the hearing process, meaning that the student, the brahmachari, should hear. He literally sacrifices his ear for the service of the Lord. You sacrifice this limb for the Lord, it means you're lending this ear to the Lord. I will hear about you. Then after being a student, which is a life of celibacy, a life of complete focus, it said that the unsuccessful student becomes a householder, a grahastha and a householder. Those who are unsuccessful in their studies, who didn't fully realize Brahman, who didn't realize the Lord, and so therefore they still have material desires, like most of us here, they become householders. Now, the reality is that about 95% of the students are unsuccessful students because, you know, the exams are very difficult. But that's just a fact. So the successful one will go directly to sannyas and become a renounced person. No need to get into all this material life. But most of us, we have some desires. And so therefore, we become a householder. And that's the next 25 years of life. And I think the picture says it all, right? So this is a time when, you know, we can have our family, we can try playing God in our little house, we can be Ishvars of our family members, and we can dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. You know, the artha, kama, and artha are prominent in this ashrama, but we do so in a regulated way. Krishna then describes that the sacrifice of the householder is not sacrificing the senses like the brahmachari does. So it does not, they don't have the time to hear all the time or, you know, sacrifice their senses in the Lord all the time, but they sacrifice the objects of the senses. So they accumulate, and that accumulation is the objects of the senses. They accumulate nice money and nice houses and cars and all these things. And so their sacrifice is sacrificing the objects of the senses, which are these material things, for the service of the Lord. And for this reason, it's a very deep dharma. It's a very deep dharma of this stage of life. Because for this reason, Lord Chaitanya says that the first and foremost duty of a householder is to give charity. We see that around the world, our temples struggle. And that is because of the miserly householders. That is their fault. Why should the temple struggle? Why should the sannyasis and the retired vanaprasthas and the brahmacharis, the students, struggle? There's no shortage of money in this world. It is because of the miserly householders. So a point here, general point here, that just like our dharma changes based upon our varna, based upon the fact whether we are a warrior or a businessman or a teacher, our dharma also changes based upon our stage in life. So if that policeman was a retired policeman, then his duty maybe would not have been to fight because he was old and weak, and his duty changes over the course of his life also. But he was a warrior and he was also a working man. He was, you know, he was in the prime of his youth, and so therefore it was his duty to perform that activity at that time. So this is the householder life. There are very deep duties. The householder is supposed to sustain all the other ashramas and serve the sannyasis, serve the vanaprasthas, and take care of the brahmacharis like their own children. That is, they're supposed to nurture society. That's the duty of the grahasthas. Then the vanaprastha, ages 50 to 75. The vanaprasthas, this is now the retired stage of life. And this is the stage of life where we start giving up. So in the previous stage, we start to accumulate. As we enter into it, we start to get a 1-car garage. And then as you know, that becomes a 2-car garage. And then that becomes too small for people. So then they get a 3 or 4-car garage. So that's the time when people are accumulating. Vanaprastha is the time when you start giving things up. Okay, I don't need this. Let's start passing things out. Vanaprastha is the life of renunciation. This is where the husband and wife, they stay together, but they renounce the day-to-day material activities of business, family, all these things. They turn it over to their children and they go on pilgrimage. Therefore, you see here this devotee going on pilgrimage. Just take a few items and travel and preach. Purify one's own existence by going on pilgrimage, but also preaching to others. Preaching is one of the main occupations of the Vanaprastha stage, because one has a lifetime of experience. One has been a student, one has been a householder, and the Vanaprastha can therefore counsel and guide the householders. They have a lifetime of experience to share and to preach with others. But also, it's a time of detachment where they start to detach from this world. We see that in Vedic culture, when people turn 50, 55, they would give the keys of the house to the kids, put the business in the name of the children, and leave it up to the kids. It was time to close shop or pass it on, not to remain attached to it. Srila Prabhupada says how today's politicians, they hold on to their seats until the very end of life because they have no conception of detachment. They don't know that the cruel hand of death will take it away from them anyway. So better they give it away voluntarily, freely, rather than being forced to give it away. So this is the stage of natural detachment. It's true that actually even in materialistic culture, in Western culture, there's somewhat of a realization of this and somewhat of a practice of this. You'll see how Americans at a certain age, they'll buy a camper, and to buy the camper, they'll sometimes even sell their house because campers are very expensive. And they'll buy a camper and they'll, maybe get some things and they'll start traveling and they'll go to one national park to another. And for some of them, it's a very spiritual experience. They're visiting national parks and appreciating nature. And so they'll visit one national park to another. The problem is that in spite of that, selling everything and getting a camper, they still remain very attached to their dogs that go along with them and to their intoxication and to their meat eating. And so that type of retirement doesn't help them so much. It's not a true detachment. But for many of them, there is a realization, and it is a spiritual stage in life for them. And to see the difference of consciousness, there's a nice illustration for this. In my own youth, my parents used to take us to national parks sometimes when on summer break or this. So one time when we were traveling, we saw a big camper drive by. And this was one of those deluxe ones. You get it for like $70,000. It has a full kitchen inside and like luxury bed and the bathroom. So this camper came by, and behind the camper, there's a bumper sticker. And this bumper sticker said, "One who dies with the most toys wins." So he said, this is, I have all these things and my camper is one more of the toys that I have. So one who dies with the most toys wins. And we thought, kind of laughed when we saw that. And then about 15 minutes later, when we kind of drove into the national park, into the parking lot of that national park, we saw parked a very rickety, small little old Volkswagen camper. I think many of you know what I'm speaking of. Just barely. I mean, when it drives, you think any moment it's just going to crack. We saw one of those, and that also had a bumper sticker in the back. And what did the bumper sticker for that one say? It said, one who dies with the most toys still dies. So you see, this person was a little more spiritually advanced. He was also retired, Vanaprastha stage. One who dies with the most toys still dies. So therefore, he was enjoying his old rickety camper because at the end, no one keeps their toys. So the Vanaprastha is retiring, is giving up all of these things. And some of the Vanaprasthas, in this day and age in Kali Yuga, it is less common because sometimes people don't even live so long. Some of the Vanaprastha may become sannyasis. At this age, the man may go alone, even then leaving his wife, and may go to the forest or may become a traveling, an urban monk, a traveling preacher. And the wife, she may also remain, you could say, an ascetic and stay in an ashram or in a temple or a forest. But generally speaking, we see that they may go back home and they become the guides, the leaders of the household, because again, they have that renunciation, that detachment. They're not going back home to become attached again, but rather to give spiritual knowledge to the children and the grandchildren. So in Vedic culture, we find all the examples there. There's in the Aranyaka Upanishad, there's examples of female ascetics. In the Vaikhayasana Vedas, there's actually mention of female ascetics. In Vedic times, there were, but it was very rare. And there's also mention, not so rare, of women living alone in the ashrams, so not in the forest, but in the ashram. And there's also examples of women going back, women like Devahuti, staying at home or going back and becoming self-realized souls. So these are the 4 ashramas, the different stages in life. And they're divided in terms of 25 years each. But it's important to remember that this is not like overnight a light bulb goes on and overnight something changes. It's important to recognize that the time period that a person is in each ashram can be relative or different. Someone may become a sannyasi at the age of 60. Their situation may be different. You know, if let's say if their spouse dies at an early age, they may become a sannyasi at the age of 60, or they may just decide to become a sannyasi at an earlier age. So this seems to be the general progress in terms of the ashrams, but the actual age groups are flexible, and one can plan or meditate on entering a certain stage of life based upon one's spiritual determination. So the 4 ashramas are there, and then there are the 4 varnas. Before I go to the 4 varnas, any questions on the ashrams?
So, Prabhuji.
A little louder, maybe. Oh, actually,
Prabhuji.
yes.
So we were not lucky enough to hear during the 0 to 25 years of age. So we are hearing mostly during the Grihastha stage, and unfortunately we didn't even have a proper career during Grihastha, and it coming more towards retirement. You know, so our life is all like not following this varna ashram system. So in practicality, like in Krishna consciousness, what do you recommend? That if you didn't have a career, even if you start late, like for the sake of donating or sake of pursuing our spiritual goals, is it still okay to start a career this late? And
Yes.
you know, also keep hearing as much, because you know you have to make up for the 25 years that we didn't hear.
Yes, very excellent question. This is why I mentioned actually that why the 4 stages are there, but the actual application of those is flexible. Exactly for this reason, as you mentioned, some people start spiritual life at a later stage in life. So they may have to do more, they may have to work harder on the Grihastha stage. And their spiritual life is more of a challenge. They go through more difficulties and more challenges because they started later in life. And those who start early in life, they do have a potential benefit. They are actually more fortunate in that way. However, the challenge there is sometimes when we start early in life, then as they say, familiarity breeds contempt. We start early in life, we don't value it. We say, oh, I always had it. My parents did it also. Now I do it also. And we see that the youth in our Krishna consciousness is sometimes not so serious. And people who join late, they become very serious and they make spiritual advancement very quickly. So there are benefits in every situation that people have, and every situation is different that people have. So the key thing in Varnashram is to understand the principles of it. Meaning that I understand that, okay, I've worked now for 20 years. My children are grown up. It's time for me to retire. Prabhupada says at the age of 50, whatever it is, one must retire. Because life is now only, we forget life is not eternal. We only have so many more years. So at the age of 50, that's one thing Prabhupada is actually very fixed on in terms of timing. He says we should retire because if we are not going to pursue spiritual life now, then when will we do it? Will we do it after we are in the coffin? So he says, no, at 50, it's Krishna's, that number is a very, symmetrical number. It's Krishna's first indication that, okay, this is time for us to now focus on spiritual life. We've made the money that we had to make. Now it's time to focus 100% on Krishna. So it's the principles behind it that, okay, the purpose of life is to please Krishna, is to find Krishna, to realize Krishna. And so for that end, now is the time that I need to retire and focus on Krishna consciousness.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji.
Thank you.
Hare
Thank you.
Krishna Prabhu. Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So, from age 0 to 25, you're supposed to follow the brahmacharya ashram. But in olden days, I think people were getting married earlier, actually, when they were, in the 18, 19, 20 years, So even before they were turning 25, some of them, they had kids also. So how is it in a kind of, following that Varnashram Dharma? And I have another question related to that. Right now, currently, especially in America, in modern worlds, the adults or young people, they don't get married until they are in their 30s or
Yes.
late 30s, 40s, and they don't start their married life having they have their kids in, like, in their 40s. So how does that actually, especially, I'm not so much concerned about, like, people who are not devotees, but some devotees who are very much interested, especially if somebody wants to go for a medical study. It's going to take until 30s for them to, finish their study and then start the job. So, as a devotee, should we not follow this profession and just, do something that can, give us some knowledge, some qualification, and we can get a job? How do we understand that?
Yes. So on both sides, as you described, this is why I mentioned that the ages, the cutoff of the ages is flexible because, like you mentioned, many devotees get married earlier than 25. One example of that is Ramanujacharya himself. I believe it was like the age of 19 when he got married. So even the acharyas, we see that they oftentimes got married earlier than the age of 25. And in some quotes, Prabhupada says that one should start early and end early if one is going to have children. Because if you have children very late, then you won't be able to retire by the age of 50. So all of these considerations have to be taken into account. And these considerations may be affected by not just our ashram, which we're discussing now, but also our varna. What is our profession, like you mentioned? So we have the four varnas, the Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. Based upon what our varna is, that may affect when exactly we enter into a certain ashram. If we are planning to become a doctor, yes, we may enter the grahastha life later. But then we should maybe plan on having kids earlier so that we don't, we can retire in time. in general, Prabhupada said we should choose a profession that is according to our nature and that is also good for the cultivation of Krishna consciousness. So, so we have to see, we don't want to choose a profession that's too taxing, but someone may be born in a doctor family or is just very attracted to being a doctor. So they have to do what they have to do. They can even get married in medical school. So many people do. And so one has to, again, understand the principles. Why is Krishna saying this? Varnashram is a process of empowerment, not a process of repression. Through Varna Ashram, an individual can be empowered to do what they do very well by following the system of rules and regulations, by getting the education according to their Varna and Ashram. That is the purpose of Varna Ashram. So I will actually now speak about ashramas, and then we'll do more questions, because this will tie in very well with the remaining questions that people have. So the 4 varnas. This is Brahmana, the priest, the teachers, the Kshatriyas, the warriors, the administrators. The Vaishyas. The Vaishyas are primarily farmers, agriculture. The Vaishya's duty is to nurture all of society, and also businessmen. But Vaishya doesn't just mean, a stock market broker. It means someone who is cultivating food, is working with the land, the cows. And then Shudra is the laborer or the employee. So these are the different varnas, and they're very significant for different reasons. As you know, this varna system is compared to the human body. The Brahmanas are like the head, the Kshatriyas are the arms, the protectors, the Vaishyas are the stomach nurtures the entire body, and the Shudras are the legs. And just like every part of the body is most important, it's very important, it has its own function. Similarly, every varna is equally important. At the same time, there's a recognition that just like the head in the body is most important, the Brahmana have the most serious role, the responsible role, because they teach society. They're the guides, they're the eyes of society, and they have the duty of being very ideal. And the Kshatriyas should follow the instructions of the Brahmanas. They should not be too proud. They should follow the vision of the Brahmanas. So on these varnas, there are certain qualities and activities that accompany each of these varnas. Would anyone like to share just one quality, one activity at random? And I want a lot of responses, so just share one, and share one that hasn't been shared. Any
Brahmanas, Brahmanas are Patan, Yajan.
Okay, just one, Mataji, and tell me in English.
Okay, Brahmanas do teaching work.
Okay, so that's one of the activities. 1 second here, I just mess this up. 1 second.
Sacrifice.
Okay.
Equality.
So Brahmana does teaching, sacrifice. Truthfulness is the quality of a Brahmana, a very important one.
Preaching about the God.
Let's say that's part of teaching.
Cleanliness.
Cleanliness. Mercy. Okay.
Learning.
So if they're teaching, they should always be learning, studying the Vedas. Learning. Very important for the Brahmanas. Thank you. Nice one.
Compassionate.
Mode of goodness.
Mode of goodness.
Inquisitive.
Okay, inquisitive.
Yajna.
And compassionate.
They perform priest services.
Yes, they are priests. So, like funerals, weddings, the services in the temple, worshiping the Lord, and you mentioned sacrifices, yagyas.
Prabhuji, tolerance.
Tolerance is a very important quality of a Brahmana.
Humble.
Humble, Prabhuji.
And humble, yes. Brahmanas must be very humble.
They should have Brahman realization.
They should have knowledge. Brahmana means knowledge of Brahman. Okay. Very
Simplicity,
nice. Huh?
Simplicity.
Simplicity. Wow, such nice qualities in simplicity.
Prabhuji, receiving
next.
charity.
They should live by charity. They should receive charity. We'll get more into this soon. Then the next one, Kshatriya. What are the qualities and activities of the Kshatriyas?
Protection, selflessness,
Protective.
Protection, protective.
Warriors.
Say that again.
Warriors.
They should be brave, willing to fight. Leadership.
Administration.
Administrators.
They're all kings.
Brahmanas.
Yes, protection. All the classes of Brahmanas, Vaishyas, Shudras.
Focused.
Focused.
Loyal.
They should be loyal.
Fearless.
Fearless. Okay. Very nice.
Rulers. Don't back down from challenges.
So they should
Heads of state.
Ensure dharma is followed in the kingdom.
Yes. I was actually waiting for this. Ensure dharma is followed. So not only do they protect people, but they also protect religious principles. They protect the goodness, the righteousness of human society.
Altruistic.
Okay, very good. They should give charity. If they give charity, where do they get their money from?
Taxation.
They collect taxes. And then they don't collect it for themselves, but they then share it. They distribute it equally amongst society where it is most needed. Okay, now the Vaishya, qualities of the Vaishya.
Businessman.
Okay. So that's
cow protection.
Cow protection.
Cow protection, very nice.
Farming.
Prabhuji, lying.
I was waiting for someone to say this. Lying is not one of the qualities of a Vaishya. But I know why you are mentioning this is because Prabhupada gives the example later in the Gita that a businessman may have to stretch the truth. That's exactly the way in which he means it, and he says it. You have to stretch the truth in order to make a profit. And Srila Prabhupada gives the example. He says that the businessman tells the customer, from you, I make no profit. I mean, this is my cost price. But the fact is, both the customer and even the businessman knows that if he was not making a profit, why would he be there? So the businessman can be a little clever, he does not have, let's put it this way, that he does not have the obligation for utmost honesty
Money lending
in the way that the Brahmana does. Why? Because that is not his mode of work. He has to be a little clever. Yes, go ahead.
Money lending.
Okay, money lending.
Offer charity to Brahmanas.
Charity.
Yes, giving charity. Very important. Taking care of the Shudras, right? The workers.
Banking.
Huh?
Banking, Prabhuji.
Banking, yes. Banking is like a form of business. Yes. Okay, now the Shudra. What are the qualities of the Shudra?
Public works.
Say that again.
Laborer class.
Public works.
Public works. Okay.
Art.
But they're laborers, they're employees.
Dependent.
One of the qualities of the Shudra is that they're dependent on the employer.
Social service.
social service. I mean, the Gita doesn't describe it exactly in that way. Like they're employed to do different services, but nothing specifically for social service. Like they may serve the Brahmanas, they may serve the Kshatriyas or the Vaishyas, they may be employed by them. And that includes social service. Skilled workers, yes, they are skilled workers. They have a craft and they take great pride in that. So they are employed, that is true, but they're also very skilled and they take pride in their skills. So businessman, he makes money, he or she is not so concerned so much whether or not they have the skills. Let's say if they have a carpentry business, they have the skills to do the carpentry work. They're known for their business, not so much for their skills. But the workers, they may be world famous because of their skills. So Shudra doesn't necessarily mean that he's lower. He's just known for something different. He's known for his skills. But still he's dependent. He's an employee rather than the employed. So in that way there's more dependence. As we find, I mean, it's just a fact of life. Anyone who has a job knows that at a certain point, you're going to be treated in a lesser way because your boss is in control. So there's a mode of, you could say, of disadvantage there in some ways because one is an employee. But then there's the skill in that work.
Prabhuji, unable to control senses?
This is a very interesting one. The Shudra is unable to control the senses. So this could be the case. It is more the case in the case of a Shudra than in the case of a Brahmana. But this is not necessarily the case. This is not, you could say, one of the characteristics of the Shudras. Why? Because even though their mode of work is more sensual, it is less focused towards the cultivation of knowledge, and their mode of work is more, you could say, they're more just focused on the particular craft rather than the meaning of life. And therefore the guna of the Shudra is oftentimes described more to be in the mode of ignorance and passion. But still, a great devotee of the Lord may also be a Shudra by the nature or the mode of work that they have. And here I'm not speaking of a pure devotee of the Lord. A pure devotee of the Lord is beyond any of this, but a devotee who's advanced but is not completely pure may be acting within the Varna ashram system and may be acting in the mode of a Shudra and may have complete control over their senses. But they may still be doing the mode of work of Shudra. So when we refer to, and this is a very key point, when we refer to the Varna of someone, we're referring to an occupation, and in the Gita we are generally also referring to a mode of nature. The Brahmana's work is more, so every system has a context, and the context of the Varna ashram system is that all of us are at a certain point will die. So the context of the Varna ashram system is that every person is facing death. Now the Brahmana is aware of this, and therefore the Brahmana does not see value in the temporary things of this world. The Brahmana therefore decides to cultivate knowledge, particularly spiritual knowledge. Therefore the Brahmana is more in the mode of goodness, because they're seeing the reality of death and they're preparing for that. The Kshatriya should be more evoluted, not necessarily, but it should be more evoluted because they also perform sacrifices and charity. They lead the society on the path of dharma. Therefore, their mode of nature is goodness, but a lot of passion and goodness mixed. They are primarily governed by those modes. But some Kshatriyas are completely in the mode of goodness, like Maharaj Yudhishthira. But that Varna is primarily dealt with those modes. Then the Vaishyas, they are into money. Okay, let's make money. Come on, this is fun. So that is more passion and ignorance. They're forgetting that what is the purpose of making money? Life is temporary. That's not the ultimate goal of life. So they are primarily governed by passion and ignorance. And the Shudra is very, very involved in their skill and their trade. They're completely into it. Their carpentry, their music, their painting, their electrical engineering, their making of robots, all these things. But then maybe forgetting that all of these skills are only material skills, and also being more kind of on the dependent mode, being an employee, they may be more prone to the mode of dependence, which is the mode of passion and ignorance, but more ignorance there. So these are the general modes that the different varnas are characterized in. However, the individuals in those varnas are not necessarily in those modes. So that varna is characterized by that mode, but the individuals are not. Meaning that the Shudra can be perfectly situated in the mode of goodness, even more than a Brahmana, if that Shudra is a very sober, very introspective Shudra, and particularly if he's a devotee of the Lord. And a Brahmana may be a Brahmana, but if he's very much into power and reputation and control, then they may be lower than a Shudra. So in terms of their modes of nature. So very important point. I'm glad you brought that up.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Yes.
Prabhuji, I had a related question, and I wanted to hear your perspective on the context of that particular statement, Kalau Shudra Sambhavat, which basically means that everyone in this age of Kali is actually a Shudra. Can you explain what, like, so when Prabhupada mentions that, what it's in which context, and how do we understand that?
So Kalo Shudra Sambhava means in Kali Yuga everyone is a Shudra. So what is the meaning of this statement? The meaning is that in Kali Yuga everyone is born on this. It's all the same round zero. Everyone is born a Shudra. Why? Because people in this day and age are not doing Garbhodhan Sanskar. They are not performing the spiritual rites before conception. And therefore people are not born with the qualities of a Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Brahmana. They're born with the qualities pretty much of a Shudra. And then one has to elevate oneself through training and association. One has to elevate oneself to higher levels. So Kalo Shudra Sambhava, what that means is that it tells everyone, don't be proud. In this day and age, everyone is pretty much a Shudra. And we may have our particular natures. Some people are born more business-minded or more warrior-like, but really it's not our birth that will determine. Anyway, in Varnashram, birth does not determine your Varna. It's not the deciding factor, although it can be an influential factor. The family that you're born in can influence your profession. So it does have a big influence. But everyone starts with ground zero in this day and age. And we must work on our qualities and our activities to become a particular Varna. Now, before we have more questions, one more slide on this, and then we'll be ready for it. We have completed it. So 1 second, just a quick. So now, given these qualities and activities that we have, there are certain privileges and trade-offs of each Varna. So every Varna has a particular privilege and a particular trade-off. For the Brahmana, the privilege is that the Brahmana is respected by all other classes. Everyone respects the Brahmanas because they have the spiritual knowledge, they have the spiritual wisdom, they have a very special role in society. But then what is the trade-off? If you're going to get that role in society, if you're going to get that respect, you're going to guide other society, there also needs to be a balance to it. The trade-off is the Brahmana does not accept or receive a salary. In other words, pretty much, if you don't, for most Brahmanas, the Brahmana accepts a vow of poverty. So if we are going to be knowledgeable and leaders and intellectuals, we cannot be after wealth. Otherwise, people won't trust us. We can't be like, there's some people who in America who lead mega churches, and they have net worths of like 20 to 25 million dollars, and they've made that money from the church that they run. These are called mega churches, and it's unbelievable. You watch these videos, and they're priests, they're pastors, apparently telling people to surrender to God and work for the benefit and the good of all people. And then they're driving Cadillacs, they have massive mansions, their net worth is $25 million. They have very fancy suits. And you think, how can, what happened here? So Brahmana voluntarily accepts. He does not accept a salary, and therefore is respected by all other classes. But there's a very specific reason why the Brahmana does not accept a salary. Why is that? Because as soon as you accept a salary, what you say has to be pleasing or acceptable to the person who is giving you a salary. And therefore, whatever you say will be biased. A Brahmana is not biased. A Brahmana is so unbiased that therefore the Brahmanas like Chanakya Pandit would live outside of the kingdom, would not even accept a house from the king, so that when they gave the king instruction, everyone knew they were not trying to favor the king. Like these days, the trustees and things of an organization, they're all like, they're all scratching the backs of the executives. Why? Because there's some common financial benefit there. But the Brahmanas weren't like that. They were the advisors, and therefore they were completely unbiased. Therefore, they never accepted a salary. This is a principle. The Kshatriyas, their privilege is that they have a lot of wealth, right? They collect the taxes, they have a lot of power, and they have a very, luxurious life, comfortable life. But then what is the trade-off for them?
They have to offer protection.
They have to be willing to give their life first if there's some danger. So they sacrifice their life. And so people say, okay, if we're attacked, this guy will die before me. This guy is ready to sacrifice his life for us. Therefore, let him enjoy the wealth. He deserves the wealth and the power that he has, because that person is willing to stand up and protect the others. So, willing to sacrifice life for others. And so therefore, privilege, but also a very deep responsibility. For the Vaishya, what is the privilege? Wealthy life also, comfortable, gets to be the boss of the company. But then the sacrifice is that the Vaishya must nurture all of their dependents. So the Vaishya is the boss of the company. He's the leader. But then when there's a time of difficulty, then the Vaishya cannot just lay off all of his employees. Cannot just say, oh, well, now fend for yourself. No, the Vaishya should nurture the dependents, should take care of them like their own children. He then has an obligation towards his employees which is something that we see very much lacking in modern society. In modern culture, this is not there. The moment you're not profitable for the company, you might have worked for the company 20 years. The moment their stock goes down, you're on the cutting line. And because we don't have real Vaishyas running the businesses, therefore there's so much anxiety in society. The Vaishyas have a duty. If there's a pandemic, they have to feed all of society. Hunger and poverty is something that modern society has created. We think that it is something normal. I mean, every society, obviously there'll be some hungry and some poor people. But in previous societies, in spiritual societies, there was no one that was poor or hungry, because the wealthy took it as their personal obligation to make sure they were wealthy, true, but they made sure that everyone was comfortable and was nurtured. So their duty is to nurture all of society. Very big responsibility, very deep, grave responsibility. Finally, the Shudras. In the Shudras, we'll start with the trade-off. For the Shudras, their life is one of service. And you could say their life is one of following instructions. Of course, I'm overgeneralizing here. They also have a lot of creativity and those things. But the basic point is, if you receive a salary, anyone receives a salary, they're actually in the Varna of a Shudra. So then you have to, you have to be a dependent, as we mentioned. But then what is the privilege? So I started with the trade-off this time. What is the privilege? They have an easy, simple life. Happy-go-lucky life, right? So actually, in some ways, the life of a Shudra can also be very compatible and very, you could say, nice for spiritual life. Because, the businessman, they say the business never opens and it never closes. Right? The businessman has to work 24 hours a day, takes so many anxieties all day and night to make the business continue working. The Shudra, he just works. The day the business closes, well, it's the owner's headache. And, Shudra may get another job. Shudra has to do his duty, doesn't have to worry about the finances, doesn't have to worry about managing others and managing all of their complaints. It's a simple life. And therefore, it's a life that can be very compatible for spiritual development. We see in the Srimad Bhagavatam, very key point here, that in the Srimad Bhagavatam, the greatest devotees of the Lord are oftentimes Shudras, because their nature is very conducive. It is very devotional. It is very much like the nature of a devotee. Who is an example? A very nice example is Narad Muni. Narad Muni was the son of a maidservant. He was a Shudra. He would do just simple tasks of cleaning and cooking in the ashram. And because he led a humble life, he was naturally very humble. And therefore, when he became a devotee, he became a very powerful devotee because he could humbly serve the sages who were there. It was natural to him, and so therefore, that mode of activity became natural in his service to the devotees, and therefore his life became perfect. So in the process of bhakti, actually many times the Shudras do the best. The Brahmanas stay behind, like we see in the example of the Brahmanas and their wives. The Brahmanas had all this knowledge and the yagyas, and when Krishna came, they couldn't appreciate Krishna. But the wives who were leading a more simpler life, just cooking and cleaning and leading, kind of assisting their husbands, when Krishna came, they did the same thing for Krishna, and they became the greatest devotees of the Lord. So this is the very key point. Okay, I've said what I needed to say on Varnashram. Now your questions.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare
For wonderful class. I've never understood these 4 Varnas properly, but today I have really sat down and understood nicely. So I'm very grateful to you. Prabhu, you just gave example of Brahmanas and Shudra. Do you mind if I ask you example of Kshatriyas and Vaishyas in Bhagavatam?
Yes.
For my better understanding.
Definitely. So a very nice example of a Kshatriya, I think the champion example is Dhruva Maharaj. Dhruva Maharaj doesn't start off as a great devotee of the Lord. He clearly has great Kshatriya blood. He is someone who cannot tolerate an insult, which is very difficult to lead a life if you can't tolerate insults, because you get insulted all the time. That's the fact. So he's someone who cannot tolerate insults because he's a warrior, but he perfects his life. Why? Because he channels his anger and his courage into focusing on finding the Lord. He channels that determination and that anger into something good, into something beneficial, that, okay, I'm angry, I'm disturbed, and therefore I'm going to find the Lord. because he had such a nice spiritual master who was his mother, he said, I'm going to find the Lord, and the Lord is going to set this straight. You can imagine a 5-year-old child saying, God is going to set this straight because my dad isn't nice to me. So he's a Kshatriya boy. A Vaishya boy or Brahman boy or Shudra boy would not have reacted in that way. He said, okay, maybe I'll work something out. The Kshatriya boy would have thought, okay, the Brahmana boy would have thought, well, I don't want a kingdom anyway. Vaishya boy would have said, well, maybe I can work out a deal. I can make a deal. I can make a deal with my stepbrother. Maybe we'll share it half and half. And the Shudra boy would have said, okay, yeah, no, I'll just be his, I'll be his next best person. But his response is, no, I want to be the leader, because he was a Kshatriya. And his mother told him, you go and you find the Lord. And by seeking the Lord will satisfy all your desires. And he does that, and he becomes a pure devotee. And as a result of being a pure devotee, what happens? He transcends the Varnashram system, so much so that he has no desire left to be a Kshatriya. So his example also shows that a pure Vaishnava, a pure devotee of the Lord, is not within Varnashram dharma, he transcends it. Because after seeing the Lord, he tells Krishna, I don't want the kingdom anymore. I don't want to be a leader anymore. I just want you. I've now found the most blissful thing, and that is your devotional service. Very nice question. Next question was by
Prabhu Vaishya.
Oh, example of a Vaishya. Who's an example of a Vaishya? The Avanti Brahman. Very nice example. It's in the 11th canto, the Avanti Brahman. He is a Vaishya and a very business-minded Vaishya and very miserly. He's made a lot of money, it's said, but he didn't, spend it. And so everyone hates him. All of his family, men, everyone hate him. This guy is so rich, but he doesn't give any money to us. And so eventually he's thrown out of the house. And then when he's thrown out of the house, he gets a great sense of detachment. And then he finds the Lord and he becomes a pure devotee of the Lord. Pushpanjali Mataji.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Thank you.
Prabhuji, if somebody is a Brahmana, like in our ISKCON, if they are teaching the Vedic knowledge, at the same time, if they are a Vaishya where they run a company, so is that okay?
Oh, so what about the mixed Varnas? Yes, and many of us do that, right? Even for practical reasons. We may have to do two things. Like you're giving the example, some devotees, they're full-time devotees, they're preachers, they're teaching always, but then they don't want to take money from the temple or from the people they're preaching to, so they'll do a little business on the side. And by that business, they maintain themselves. So this is why this purport was so important. Very, very important. And I'm actually going to share the screen because the point that you bring up is actually one of the most important points for us in Varna Ashram. And that is this one. I believe I read this purport last week, but we are living in the age of Kali Yuga. So my own memory, we forget it. This was from chapter 3, text 35. And in this one, Prabhupada describes that once we become a devotee, then our duties are no longer determined simply based upon material factors like our varna, but our duties are determined by the order of the spiritual master. So due to our material mindset, we tend to think about things in terms of black and white. But we see that how Varna Ashram and spiritual duties are oftentimes a combination. They're combined a few things. So spiritual duties are as ordered by the spiritual master. One second. Can you please wait? Spiritual duties are as ordered by the spiritual master for the transcendental service of Krishna. So the spiritual master gives instructions generally according to our varna, not necessarily. So our varna is included in that consideration. But ultimately the devotee is interested once living in spiritual life is interested to follow the orders of the spiritual master. So whatever we do, we consult with the spiritual master. And if the spiritual master says, yes, this is the best way, this is the most practical way to go around this, that you be a Brahmana in terms of your preaching and teaching, but you also do a business on the side, then we can do it. We can be in two varnas. We can have mixed varnas. But that is not simply whimsical. That is based on the instruction of the spiritual master. Even to this point that Prabhupada says later on, he says that in Krishna consciousness, the Kshatriya may act as a Brahmana or the Brahmana may act as a Kshatriya. Not only mixing varnas, but even switching varnas is possible in the context of our spiritual duty. But we don't have the right to do that whimsically. That is, that is suggested by this, that is done in consultation with the spiritual master or the spiritual guide or the sadhus. And the devotee will therefore lead a life that is bona fide, that is prescribed by the spiritual master.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji.
Thank you. Karkun Mataji, Swati Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Thank you so much for the wonderful class. Prabhuji, you said that, as Shudras, as employees, it's a simpler life, but more so in the corporate world, we see that even as employees, you're managing people and, it's very stressed out. So, and you also mentioned that, as devotees who are trying to be more Krishna conscious, then you're not subject to the varnashram. So how do we see ourselves? We consider ourselves as Shudras and we try to make progress, or, where are we in this whole varnashram system? Because I don't know, if we ended up here in the occupation that we are based on our qualities, or, some of us just chose it based on what was available. It may not be a perfect match of aptitude or things like that.
Right. You actually reminded me of a very important point. As always, we're short of time. And so once these questions come through, I do have one or two more slides to share. It's very important. But one of the verses that Krishna mentions in this chapter is that a very beautiful verse. You'll read it in this chapter. He says that the devotee works only for the bare necessities of life and nothing more. So if we want to make spiritual life work, the reality is that we do have to make sacrifices. And the devotee, in terms of mature life, is actually really not ambitious. He works for the bare necessities of life. And what does that mean practically in terms of us? It means that we do our work well. But then if doing our work well makes us very successful, very famous, then wonderful. But if it doesn't, then it's not like the devotee will work nonstop to try to make themselves successful. The point being that whatever job we have, we know that, I know this, I see this myself. I can, if I work day and night, I can be here. And if I work nicely in a balanced way, I can be here. And the devotee is happy to be here rather than be here. Not because the devotee isn't ambitious, but because the devotee knows that ultimately success and failure is in the hand of the Lord. And some people who are very successful are there not because they exerted themselves too much, but just because they did their job well and they got very successful. And you see this many times in sports stars, that some sports stars, like Federer, I think in tennis, you see, they don't work really hard at the sport, but still they're champions year after year. Why? Because it's in their nature and it's in their karma. And others, they're just like literally killing themselves and still they don't make it. So the only point that I would say is yes, that we have to see, it does require choices in life. We have to see, where can I cut? What can I do less? I still need to fulfill the necessities of life. Krishna puts it so well. He says we have to fulfill the bare necessities of life, but not too much, not overdoing it.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Hare Krishna. Randy, you have a question?
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
So you're talking about detachment during the like retiring stages of life, and I was curious where like attachment to spiritual life and activities and services comes in. So I was thinking, like, should the disciple always remain attached to the guru and serving the guru? And likewise, would the guru have some kind of attachment to fulfilling their purpose, to helping bring the disciple and other devotees to Krishna? So yeah, I was curious about attachment and detachment.
Yes, actually, very nice point. Detachment is only possible if there's attachment. In other words, just like we can only raise one step when we've planted the other step on the ground, we can only become detached when we are attached. So our choice only is simply to decide where we want to be attached. There's no actually platform of complete detachment. So if we are attached to Krishna, if we're attached to the spiritual master and the instruction of the spiritual master, then and then only will we be detached from the material world. And we're detached from the material world only when we're attached to Krishna.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Hare Krishna. Gopal Govinda Prabhu. You can unmute yourself, Gopal Govinda Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. I think I had a question, but many of the points were already covered. I remember a reference of Varnashram Dharma being rejected by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his teachings.
Yes.
And then Prabhupada in his purports and illustrations in Nectar of Devotion, he also indicated that the Varnashram Dharma is not for devotees, but it then becomes confusing when we don't get in details.
Yes, that's a good question. We find almost contradictory statements in the scriptures, like you're saying. Some places rejecting Varnashram Dharma, other places accepting it. So that was actually answered in chapter 3, where Krishna said that unless one is fully Krishna conscious, one should go on performing one's prescribed duties so that one can purify oneself while one is performing one's duties, right? So, so we cannot prematurely give up our duties, because then we'll just fall into sinful life. But if we're fully Krishna conscious, we are above Varnashram. And that's when Lord Chaitanya rejects it. He says, Naham Vipra Narajapati, that I'm not a Brahmana, I'm not a Kshatriya, I'm not a Vaishya, I'm not a Shudra. I'm just a servant of Krishna's servants. I'm the servant of the servant of the servant of the Lord. So that is completely true, and that's true for all of us. But until we are so conditioned, we have to work. Krishna tells Arjuna, you will be driven to work. You are going to fight. Even if you go to the forest, you're going to end up fighting. So fight for the right cause, he tells them. So until we are fully purified, we will act according to our nature. That is the simple reality. And therefore, Varnashram means that we have to figure out how we can use our nature, which we're still conditioned by, how we can use that in Krishna's service. Do I want to use my nature in the service of Maya, or I want to use it in the service of Krishna? And therefore, Prabhupada said, we are not following materialistic Varnashram, but we are following Daivi Varnashram. Meaning the Varna ashram that has only one goal in mind, and that is, through my occupation, how can I serve Krishna? So it's for those of us who are not fully advanced.
Thank you, Prabhu. Beautiful answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Brinda?
Yes, Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much for a wonderful session. Prabhuji, I wanted to ask, how do we understand sannyas ashram from women point of view? And can you please explain more differences between vanaprastha and sannyas ashram?
Very nice. Very good question. There's actually a beautiful verse I just came across. It's from the Hari Bhakti Vilas, and I have it, but I just can't open that up right now because I'll have to find it in some documents. But there's a very nice verse in Hari Bhakti Vilas which says that all the restrictions that you find in the scriptures that are for men and for women, and particularly in this context, since we're talking about women, they are all there in the material context, in the material life. But in spiritual life, in terms of spiritual duties and activities, there is no restriction for women. They can do, the verse specifically mentions that devotee women are beyond or above these restrictions, because these are in relation to spiritual life, and the soul in a man or the woman is the same. So this is the principle. But having said this principle, the you could say the spiritual culture is oftentimes such that the sannyas ashram, which is an ashram where the person lives alone, is considered dangerous and not, you could say, not suggested for women. And their sannyas is still a sannyas, but it manifests in a different way. They don't formally take the order of sannyas, but they're fully renounced and they are respected as such. And that is because, I mean, there are practical examples. You know, in Vrindavan, one devotee, she took the order of sannyas, and then she was attacked by unscrupulous men. So it is not so common, and it is not so, you could say, highly recommended. But at the same time, as I mentioned, in Vedic texts, we do find actual examples of, and it's there in the Vedas, I'm not saying it, we find examples of women sannyasis. We find examples of women ascetics, and they would stay together in ashrams, and they would travel in the forest, and they had great mystical powers. So if a demon or someone came to attack them, they just, you know, zap them and burn them with their mystical powers. And so it just it's more of just a practical form that they don't practically in this day and age, when don't take the you know, the formal order of sannyas. But the mindset, the mode, is one of a sannyasi. And the difference between vanaprastha and sannyas is really just at that point the husband and wife part. They stay separate. It's a complete dedication. Now I'm not even depending upon my wife or my husband. I only have one sole protector, guide, and Lord, that is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And therefore the sannyasi is given so much respect, because they've formally taken a life of complete surrender and dependence on the Lord, both for the men and the women. So, very nice question.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Thank you for answers.
Mera? Yenna Mera?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, I think it was by mistake that I raised my hand.
Will you ask your question?
No, Prabhuji, I think my hand got raised by mistake.
Okay, no problem. Okay. And then Kishore Prabhu.
Yeah, Hare Krishna, Dhanapranam.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah, Prabhuji, you know, actually, you know, you talked about this one vanaprastha, right, retired life. So basically, you know, let's say in this age of Kali, we have so many duties to take care. Like, you know, by 50, taking vanaprastha is not that easy, because, you know, you have family, you know, kids, you know, education, marriage, and, you know, even your financial status. So it may not be possible to take at 50. Like,
Yes.
yeah. So how we can, you know, maybe
Yes.
we can, maybe, you know, we are doing some seva in temple, you know, we are doing preaching, whatever we can do.
Yes.
On top of this, you know, how, like, you know, how vanaprastha should, like, you know, should lead from grihastha to vanaprastha.
Yes. See, we need to recognize, very practical question, nice question. We need to recognize that just like we're unable to do it now, and you could say vanaprastha didn't wait for us, as you're mentioning, in the same way, death will also not wait for us. right? So just because, let's say I start my work late in life and I'm not able to retire at the age of 50, it's not like death will take that into account and say, okay, well, this guy got a late start, so let me give him 5 more years. So while the argument that you're presenting is reasonable, it's understandable, but the reality is that the situation still hasn't changed. We all still have only that many years to live.
Yeah.
And so therefore Prabhupada says that whatever it is, we have to find a way to do it. Because the problem is that even though right now we may say, okay, no, it's fine, it's okay, but the reason why we're doing it, that still hasn't changed. Life is only so long. And so therefore, at least we can go into the mindset. And that's the main thing. So externally, like you're saying, we may not be able to give up our job. We may not be able to do these things at that point in life, but we should start going into the mindset. And that is one way that we can do it. So I think that is, you could say, middle ground.
Hare Krishna, I have a question. My
Hare
name is
Krishna.
Prabhakar. You mentioned there are ashramas, 4 ashramas, but we listed only 3. Where is the 4th?
Did I forget to list the 4th? Sorry.
Yes, Brahmachari, Gruhastha, Vanaprastha, but that is only 3.
Then the last one was sannyasi. It was on the next line. I apologize. It was on the next line. The last one is sannyasi.
Okay, thank you so much. That makes clear now.
Yes, no, I'm glad you clarified. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Hari Nam Kirtan Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, that was the name. Thank you for the nice class.
Thank you.
I have a question about, as we see in the ISKCON, Srila Prabhupada desires to establish the Varnashram Dharma, and the way, the emphasis is into farm cultivation, grow, own vegetable, live by your own. And many Prabhupada disciple quote, if you are like working in this material world, you are in that cycle. You are depending on somebody, you're depending on Walmart, you're depending on, all different stores. And Srila Prabhupada says, within 100 years, this all civilization will wrap up. Everybody will come to the farm, villages, So I see that thing is, the concept is evolving. Many Prabhupada disciples and, our generation is working towards that goal. I'm just not sure how the ashram system or the Varna system will fall after 20 years or 30 years.
Yes.
Please
See,
give thoughts on that.
Yes. See, once we go back to that lifestyle, then applying Varnashram will actually be even easier. Because once we're back with the land and the cows, then that is the lifestyle that really works with Varnashram. Right now it's difficult because even the teachers are salaried. Even the farmers are salaried. It's like you have very few businessmen, you have very few actual administrators, you have very few actual brahmanas. And so therefore, in our present society, we have to apply the principles of Varna Ashram more than the externals of Varna Ashram. In other words, how many of us can close shop and go to the land and start digging and being a farmer? We cannot. We cannot, right? So then how do we practice that? We try to practice the principles of Varnashram. As a Vaishya, what is my duty in this way? As a Brahmana, what is my duty? As a Kshatriya, what is my duty? So we may not be able to change the externals, but we follow the internals. And the same will be true later on, that the principles remain the same. But once we're back to the farm, then the application will change. And actually, it will become easier to apply Varnashram.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Thank you.
Helps.
Nice question. Very nice question. Yeah. Well, sometimes people in ISKCON, they get really, really fixed up on the externals. You have to do all this, and then they are confused. How do I practice it while working, and do I give up my job? I feel like I'm a Brahmana, so I shouldn't get a salary. Should I go? So it's best if a person can do that. But many of our saints in our movement, they say, we start with the principles, start with the heart, and then the externals will change. Brandy, do you have a second question?
No,
That...
Prabhu.
Okay, that's just there. Perfect. Okay, wonderful. So just one last thing. As I told you, I want to share just 2 quick slides with you so that we can wrap up the chapter. Varnashram is a very big topic in this chapter, therefore we did that. Just a quick thing here that I was going to mention that the jati system or the system of outcasts, this is never condoned. Condoned. It's never endorsed. Sorry, it's never endorsed by Krishna. This jati system is something that's a modern system to try to suppress people. It's very similar to racism, and in fact, the bhakti, the process of bhakti, is against a system that's based on birth. There's no varna called Dalits or untouchables. The Shudras are not untouchables. The Shudras are one of the equal orders of the Varnashram system. The untouchables and the Dalits, these all came only due to politics. This has nothing to do with Varnashram, and it's very bad. And Bhakti is against it. And therefore you'll find not just ISKCON, of course, our own tradition sees no difference between high or low birth, but even other Vaishnav Sampradayas, to make a point, here we see this image, the priest of the temple, he is carrying a quote-unquote Dalit on his shoulders, and that Dalit is a devotee of the Lord, to show that a devotee of the Lord is the highest caste. Devotees are all equal, all souls are equal, and it's only due to externals that we think one person is higher or lower. In front of God, we are all the same. So this is there, universally there in all bhakti traditions. From text 16 to 24, Krishna teaches knowledge of action and inaction. So in the last chapter, we talked about karma yoga, which was the art of action. In chapter 4, he's giving us the knowledge of how to know what is action and what is inaction, since this chapter is focused on knowledge. Krishna is, after telling us what Varnashram is, he's now telling us how do you perform activities on the transcendental plane. And you'll see the qualities of a devotee who is transcendental being described. And then the last section of verses, no, actually, this is the one before the last. He talks about how sacrifices lead to transcendental knowledge. So how do we get this knowledge? We get spiritual knowledge not through some intellectual gymnastic, but we get spiritual knowledge through sacrifice. That is why Harinam Sankirtan Yagya, when we chant Vidya Vadhu Jivanam, when we chant, we get knowledge. Because knowledge comes through sacrifice, and literally through sacrifice. No one gets knowledge unless they actually sacrifice their time and energy to gain that knowledge. When we do things for others, when we sacrifice, we get knowledge. So he has some verses on sacrifice. And then the last part, these are the summary of transcendental knowledge, and these are very beautiful verses. And text 34 is also one of the most famous verses of the Gita. Text 34 is, just try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master. Inquire from him submissively and render service unto him. The self-realized souls can impart knowledge unto you because they have seen the truth. So now, after describing the glories of knowledge and how knowledge is received, he's telling Arjuna, you go and you find a Tattvadarshi, someone who has seen the truth. You go and you find a spiritual master and you serve him very respectfully and ask questions. Having obtained real knowledge from a self-realized soul, you will never fall again into such illusion. For by this knowledge, you will see that all living beings are but part of the Supreme, or in other words, that they are mine. And then the last few verses glorify transcendental knowledge. These are very nice verses to know. Even if you are considered to be the most sinful of all sinners, when you are situated in the boat of transcendental knowledge, you will be able to cross over the ocean of miseries. As a blazing fire turns firewood to ashes, O Arjuna, so does the fire of knowledge burn to ashes all reactions to material activities. So knowledge not only informs us, but it also purifies us of sinful reactions. In this world, there's nothing so sublime and pure as transcendental knowledge. Such knowledge is a mature fruit of all mysticism, and one who has become accomplished in the practice of devotional service enjoys this knowledge within himself in due course of time. So I started with this. I said, how do we get transcendental knowledge? In this last sentence, Krishna is actually answering the question. He's saying, one who has become accomplished in the practice of devotional service enjoys this knowledge within himself in due course of time. Meaning that this knowledge is not just jnana. This knowledge is vijnana. It is realized knowledge. This knowledge is realized through the practice of devotional service. Through serving the Lord, we get this knowledge. Through love, we get this knowledge. It is not ordinary knowledge that frees us from the cycle of birth and death. Therefore, we have to engage in the devotional service of the Lord to get this knowledge. Everyone reads the Gita, everyone has so much knowledge of the Gita, but why one person goes back to Godhead? Because they have actually realized this knowledge. And this knowledge becomes manifest, Krishna says, in due course of time. This knowledge is like a seed, and we have to wait. Devotional service is like a seed, and we have to wait until that knowledge fructifies in the heart. That realization comes from within the heart. And in the 10th chapter, Krishna says this. He says that how from within the heart, he gives us knowledge. Desham evanukam partam, aham agyana jammava, nashyamatma bhavastu jnana dipena bhashvata. From within the heart, he enlightens the soul who is sincere, who is seeking him. So that realization, that very deep realization, comes through devotional service gradually and becomes manifest within the heart. And Lord Chaitanya therefore says that the chanting of Krishna's holy names is vidya vadhu jivanam. It is chanting or devotional service gives birth to transcendental knowledge. And finally, as a final point, we should mention, Krishna is saying there's nothing as sublime and pure as this transcendental knowledge that we have. We're so fortunate to have this knowledge. And therefore, during this marathon, we should make every effort to distribute the Bhagavad Gita to everyone so that everyone can get this sublime spiritual knowledge. So I will stop here. And I see two more hands are raised. We'll answer these questions and then we'll move on. Champak Lata Mataji.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, I have a question. How do we understand the nature of our children and down the road when they decide on their career? Sometime we might be like their nature might be something, but that may not help them earn money and earning properly in the modern day and competition.
Yes.
So how do we balance with the nature and quality and the modern world?
Yes. No, very nice question. So what we are trying to do is we're trying to establish a system that is foreign to the world that we're trying to establish it, right? So this is the challenge. And this is why during his presence in this world, Srila Prabhupada said that this work was unfinished. He was unable to establish it. If it was easy to do, then why would he not have done it? It is difficult to do. And therefore, it is a gradual process. It is a gradual process. But one thing is clear is that we all should work according to our nature. Because if we work according to our nature, then we will undoubtedly be successful. And financially, in every way, we will be successful. Because Krishna, he mentioned this twice in the Gita. This is one of the verses he repeats twice. He says, one should never work against one's nature. In other words, he says one should always do what is one's own nature rather than someone else's nature. We read this in chapter 3, because following another's path is dangerous. So we have to see over time what is the nature of our children and encourage them accordingly. And we see in the modern world, any field, either you're an intellectual, a brahmana, a warrior, a kshatriya, a business person, or laborer, in any field you can make money. You can make money as an employee, become the CEO of Google. You can make money as a as a politician. You can make money as as an intellectual, as a teacher, and you can make money as a business person. So the main thing is to try to recognize what our nature is and to engage that nature in Krishna's service. That is Daivi Varnashram Dharma. One performs the duties according to one's nature, and one offers that to the Lord as one's service.
Okay, Prabhuji, thank you so much.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Venkatesh Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Thank you for a nice class, Prabhu. Prabhu, I have the same question on the statement of Prabhupada that 50% of my work is done. So as followers of Prabhupada, we take to this Krishna consciousness. And Prabhupada was not an impractical person. Like he won't mean something that is not practical. He won't mention something that is not practical. So in Prabhupada is mentioned that 50% of my work is done. As followers of Prabhupada, is it fair to say that it is difficult and keep on ignoring the Varnashma and stuff like that? And is it fair to say that we just have to follow the principles and and just be I don't know, probably if it was difficult, then why would Prabhupada mention that? Probably that question has been going on for ever since I came to know that statement of Prabhupada that 50% of my work is done. And we all strive so hard to keep the movement going on. As devotees, we all are followers of Prabhupada. We all want to fulfill Prabhupada's desire. So where are we at, Prabhuji, as devotees? Prabhupada started this movement not just for devotees, but for the welfare of the whole human society. So where are we as devotees helping to fulfill Prabhupada's desires?
Yes. Very nice question. So when we are distributing books, we are fulfilling Prabhupada's desire of Varnashram, because his books talk about Varnashram. His books talk about Varnashram, and then more the leaders, the politicians, they see it, they read it, they understand it. When we establish temples, we are also establishing Varnashram, because the basis of Varnashram is spiritual culture. So the devotee of the Lord, cent per cent, wants to fulfill the desire of the Lord and the desire of the spiritual master. The question, like you say, is simply how do we go about doing it? In other words, we also have to be realistic. We have to start with ourselves. Are we willing to give up our job and go to the farm and start farming? Some devotees are, and some devotees have done it. And if we are willing to do it, we should do it. But the reality is many devotees are unwilling to do it. The reality is that most of civilization still lives in the cities, and they won't go back to the bullock cart, so they won't do it. So how do we change those cities? We change those cities by following Prabhupada's other instructions, which are distributing books, opening temples, doing harinams, giving lectures, making devotees. So Prabhupada showed us by example through his life how to gradually make this happen. And Prabhupada did this on all fronts. So he had temples in the cities. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur also especially mentioned, he said that in fact, we should go to the places where there's most population. And he had temples in the most busiest cities. And Prabhupada also opened farm communities, and he sent some devotees to the farm communities to show the world the ideal life. And Prabhupada also sent some of his disciples to go out and become professors at the universities to put this into the educational system. And Prabhupada also sent some of his devotees out on vans to do Sankirtan. And Prabhupada also sent his disciples to go out on Harinam. So Prabhupada did all of these things. He just didn't do one thing. He emphasized all of them as a common strategy, as an overall strategy to deliver the world and to establish principles of Varnashram. So the goal of Varnashram is ultimately to go back home, back to Godhead, and Prabhupada did this in so many different ways. He established it in so many nice ways.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Further clarification, like the distribution of literatures and doing Harinam. Like Prabhupada, I know, most of us are aware that mentioned four divisions of our movement. One is the Harinam division, where there is a chanting of holy name and distribution of literatures, and then there is the temple and deity worship, division, where temples are, deities are installed and temples are established, so people can congregate and chant the holy name. And the third is the congregation development itself, increase in the number of devotees, and preaching movement should go on. That's one division. And the last division Prabhupada mentioned was the Varnashrama division. Among the four divisions, all the first three divisions is concerned with Brahmanas and Kshatriyas. And but if my Varna is Shudra, and if my Varna is Vaishya, and if I want to get Daiva Varnashram, should I not take up the fourth division and proceed? Should we as devotees encourage that without even knowing what my Varna? If we just keep saying that this is external and this is very difficult, so how are we going to help the people who are like Shudras and Vaishyas? Because the first two Varnas are concerned with the first three divisions of Prabhupada, and the last division is concerned with the last two Varnas. So how, Prabhuji, if we keep saying we all are into this and we are in the purification process, and if we ourselves as devotees ignore this, saying it's difficult, then how are we going to help other people, Prabhuji? I'm confused, there's various things from various directions,
Yes, and that purport that I read from chapter 3, Prabhupada is saying that in terms of spiritual activities, in material activities, we follow our occupation and our nature, like you're saying. And in terms of spiritual activities, we follow the guidance of the spiritual master. So that is really in the hands of the spiritual master. And as a disciple, our first and foremost duty is to follow the spiritual master. And the spiritual master will guide us according to our nature. So especially once we accept Diksha and initiation, then first and foremost, our duty is fulfilling the instruction of the spiritual master. And based upon the desire of the spiritual master will send one devotee to the farm and another devotee to the Sankirtan van. So it's a very big topic, and I'll actually, the ISKCON's Shastrik Advisory Council, they're publishing a paper on this. It's a very big topic. It's about a whole civilization and lifestyle, and so I'll stop at this point. It's 11:24, and we went actually way over time. Normally we go till 11 o'clock, and if there's any questions you have on the reading or anything like this, please feel free to text me or email me, and we will continue next week.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna. Dandavat Pranam. Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Dandavat Pranam.
Hare Krishna.